What up, friends? We are here again for another episode of Hot Thoughts. We got Hot Thoughts Season 3, Volume 4, and I'm excited to be joined by Jason Moore. Kind of rhymes with four. That was interesting to think about right there. And so, but we have you for Season 3, Volume 4, and we're talking about hybrid worship. And you've been going around, you've been doing this webinar on kind of both and, not either or, in terms of this kind of hybrid worship stuff. But maybe people watching, they don't know who you are or they've never heard of your webinar. Would you just quickly kind of introduce yourself? Like, what ministry are you doing? Why are you kind of doing this webinar? What's the webinar even about? And kind of what's our context of our conversation going to be about tonight?
Sure. Well, thanks first for the opportunity to be on the show. I'm excited to have this conversation
Yeah,
and
it's going to be good.
see where this hot sauce takes us. I'm not a huge hot sauce guy, so we'll just have to see what happens.
Right.
I got my start in ministry about almost 25 years ago now at Ginghamsburg United Methodist
Uh
Church.
huh.
And I was there just around the time that church kind of blew up. It was starting to happen even before I came, but I was on kind of the original worship design team, and we saw some explosive growth there and things like that. My major passion in life is deep, meaningful, creative worship, and worship that's more about what happens on Monday than Sunday. I think Sunday's important, but I also think that worship is the front door into deeper discipleship and mission and all those kind of things. So for
Right.
since 1997, when I got my start there, I've been working to train churches on kind of how to do collaborative worship design and creativity and so on. Of course, all that changed a year ago for all of
Hmm.
us as the world kind of shut down. For what happened for me was in the course of about 3 or 4 days, all of my speaking engagements canceled because COVID hit. And so I was supposed to travel. I do a lot of work in the United Methodist Church, some outside of it, but largely within it. And I had a pastor panicky Lee, however you would say that. He panicked. He was in a panic, and called me and said, "Jason, you came out last year and offered a secret worshiper consultation, and it really helped us improve our online or our in-person worship. But now we're forced online. Could you help us again? And would you watch our online worship?" And so I said, "Sure." And I wrote the notes up for him and said to him, "Hey, would you care? There's so much of what I'm going to tell you in this report that I think applies to all these churches who are all of a sudden are online. Would
Right.
you mind if I posted a little article?" And he said, "No, that's fine." So I made him anonymous and posted it. And like within a day, literally the next day, one of the annual conferences that I've done worked with over the years called and said, "Would you turn that into a workshop?" And then
Hmm.
the next day, another conference. And within 5 days, 14 annual conferences booked that training. It's not both
Wow.
and. It was called Telling the Old Story in a New Time. And ultimately, now I've done that one 35 times for about 19 annual conferences. And last fall, and I'm getting to the end of the story. Last fall, I started thinking about and becoming very concerned about the fact that while we've been doing online worship, and I think doing it pretty well in many instances, we've got a problem on our hands if we're not careful. Because as people come back into the room, we will do one of two things. We'll either turn to or keep turning to the camera and talk to the camera and make the people in the room feel like the studio audience, like Saturday Night Live or something.
Right.
Or what's more likely to happen is that we will turn our attention back to the people in the room and we won't look at the camera and we won't address people at home, and they're going to feel like observers of an experience they're not really a part of. So if we had this whole
Right.
conversation and I was looking at my room and not at my camera, it wouldn't feel anything like what we've experienced for this last year. So
Mm.
I really believe that we face maybe the most critical moment in the life of the church in the next season as people come back into our buildings. And so that's why I've created both and. It's the idea that we're going to do worship for people both in the room and people online where no one feels like an afterthought or secondary.
Awesome. Well, hey, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna dive into our first sauce, and actually, you kind of teed up a great question for me
All
that
right.
I want to get into. And so, why don't we? My first sauce is the thought sauce. So it's actually our hot sauce for hot thoughts, and I'm gonna be going. Pastor John, lead pastor here at Church of the Shepherd. He said he can't get hotter than Asian Zing at Buffalo Wild Wings, and so I decided to start with Asian Zing. Uh,
Okay.
as, so I'm going to put my sauce on top of Asian Zing.
All right.
Usually I don't go sauce on my wings, like double sauce it, but that's what I went with this week.
All right. Well, let me see here. I have a sauce somebody got me a hot sauce kit for Christmas one year. And again, I'm not a huge hot sauce guy. So I'm going to try a sauce that says not so spicy. So I'm starting off really weak here.
Hey, that's a great place to start.
Yeah. So let me see if I can. Here's my table of stuff. So here's not so spicy.
All right, I love it.
And we'll get that open there. Get the lid off. All right, so these are really awesome, like Anytizer Tyson out of a frozen bag in the air fryer. Okay, I put a hefty heap there.
I like that. The air fryer. I got to learn more about this air fryer. But while I got to learn more about it. You take a bite, and I'm going to cue you up with our question, which is this: what is even hybrid worship? And better question, what isn't it? Because I think sometimes we think we're doing it, but we're not. And so, what is it? What isn't it? And tell us about your sauce. How is it?
It's actually a lot spicier than not so spicy would indicate, because my tongue is burning. Just a touch. So I think they mislabeled that bottle. So one of the things, I guess it's okay to talk with our mouthfuls on this show, right? One of the things I've been saying recently, and sometimes people in the chat in the webinar say ouch when I say this, and that is that I don't believe that hybrid worship means that you just put a camera in the room and then you can label it hybrid worship. Some of us have just put a camera up in the balcony or in the back of the room and turned a stream on and stream live to Facebook and say, hey, we're doing hybrid worship now. I really think that hybrid worship is worship that is curated, crafted, designed in such a way that we are making sure we are giving attention to people at home and in the room equally. And in the webinar, I actually talk about 3 different ways of doing that. I call it pre-both-and worship, real-time both-and worship, and post-both-and worship. You can pre-record and think about the audience at home. You can do it in real time, or you can take the worship that you finished and edit it and make it work for an online audience. Just two quick thoughts. Number one, the NFL would never put a camera in the nosebleed seats and broadcast that as their game. If nobody would tune in if the shot was so far away. And so I think that's been some of the way that we have come up with our solution has just to put a camera in the room. The second thing I was going to say is that I don't blame anyone for this strategy if that's the strategy that we're taking. Because in the early days of film, when film cameras were first invented, filmmakers would take the camera into a theater and they'd have all the actors up on the stage, and they would put the camera in the 5th row back center seat, and they would basically just film stage plays. And the most cutting edge director at the time was the one that said, hey, let's take this camera out of the seats and take it up on the stage and get close-ups. And of course, we never went backwards. So it's a very different experience to go watch Hamilton in the seats than it is to watch it on Disney Plus, where they have multiple cameras and they're moving and all those. So we have to think about what the next iteration, I think, is of the worship that we do.
Yeah. I just watched a really good kind of worship service, pretty big church, but I was actually really amazed about kind of what you said even earlier of we can't just talk to the people out of the room. We can't talk to people in the room. And they did a really good job kind of juggling it in a way that didn't seem overproduced. It didn't seem disingenuous, but it seemed like, hey, this is just who we are now as a church. And it was interesting.
Yeah, one of the things we have to consider right now, if we're not back in worship or as we start to come back, some of us maybe already are, that camera probably represents the majority of your people. I had one conference that I was in conversation with last week tell me that they estimate that 70% of people are watching worship from home. And so if that's the case, that camera, I have to look at it and talk to those 70% of my congregation. If not, they're going to feel disconnected as I'm doing this the whole time and not really even considering them. One other quick point I'll just say here, and I'm guilty of using this language, but I have been in the last 2 or 3 weeks trying to change it. and that is we have to stop saying that people are watching our worship. We
Right.
have to stop going after views. We want worshipers online, not watchers.
Right.
We want participants, not viewers. But we have to design worship in such a way that people can participate and actually be a part of it. If not, they
Yeah.
just show up and they watch our program, and there's nothing else to it.
Right. Yeah. Like you said, I mean, it's just Saturday Night Live, right? Like, I mean, they're just
Yeah.
watching the thing, right? I mean, they're consuming. And so, well, that's great. And so what we'll do is we'll head on to the next question, which I
Sounds
think
great.
dives a little more into your personal passion for this, which you've dove into a little bit. But my next sauce, I mean, you can find this at every great Mexican restaurant. This is our El Yucateo. It's outstanding. It's one of my favorites. Very hot. So I get really hot really fast. But this is one of my favorites. But what do you got for number two?
You've got you're braver than I am. I've got a spice that is this sauce is so creatively named. It says spicy. So I went from not so spicy to now spicy.
Okay.
And let's see, we'll do a nice heaping helping here. All right, it's covered. Switch back to bite cam here.
It took me 3 seasons, but I learned a pro tip from Adam Weber.
Oh,
Go boneless. I was going bone in every week, and it was just like you're watching me destroy these wings. Boneless, the way to go.
Well, I saw the episode with Adam where he was practically crying at the end, and maybe he was crying.
You might have been, yeah.
Maybe I subliminally picked that up because I went boneless right from the start. And
Yeah.
that's definitely a significant uptick from not so spicy. I'm feeling that one.
Well, again, I always appreciate when people get a little kick. So,
Yeah.
so as the kick hits you, why does this topic interest you? But again, and you said this a little bit, but maybe just flesh it out more for us. Why is it important for the church now and the church of the future?
Danny, I have felt like we are living in an important moment in our history as a church. In fact, I feel like maybe this is the most critical moment in the life of the modern day church as we go back to in person. It's as if we are witnessing the modern day equivalent of Gutenberg firing up the press and making the Bible available to the masses.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I don't know if we've actually really considered is that prior to this pandemic, worship was on our terms. We set the day, we set the time, we set the place. And now we're doing worship in a way that we're taking it to people where they hang out on their terms. They don't know us necessarily. We can't assume all the same things that we used to. One of the things that excites me the most about this moment that we're living in is that I have seen just countless churches. I've done about 27 or 28 both and webinars now, mostly in the United Methodist Church. And I've been asking the question in the chat as I'm presenting, how many of you have seen an increase in your attendance? Like just the reach that you have now. Almost every church tells me that we're doing double, triple, quadruple. I heard of a church in Tennessee that had about 50 people worshiping in it in person over the last decade or whatever. And now they're reaching 450, 500 people a week. And that number keeps climbing and is consistent.
Wow.
So we're taking the gospel to people in a way that we never have. And it's so important that we continue this. We can't stop doing our online worship when we are allowed to come back into our buildings and just sort of say that was a fad or a trend. So that's why it matters to me.
Yeah, we've had that conversation here in a local church of like, not necessarily that we're trying to get rid of it, but saying, how do we not get rid of it? How do we not just put 1,000% of our resources back into in person, because we all remember the machine.
Yes.
We all remember that Sunday comes every week, and it took a lot of effort to get this off the ground.
Yep.
And so it is important though, because like you said, there's 400% maybe more people viewing or now worshiping with us, which is an important thing to not neglect, because they might not go anywhere else.
Yeah.
They might. It's the same thing as a church shutting down in your neighborhood, right? Like just because it shuts down doesn't mean they'll go somewhere else.
Yeah. What I say in the webinar is I use the analogy or metaphor of a book becoming a film.
Hmm.
Most of us don't really like the film as much as we like the book. Anybody that's
Yeah.
read the book first doesn't like the film as well. Uh, there are two thoughts that I often share around that particular concept. Number one, when a book becomes a film, that story becomes um, accessible for a lot more people. A lot of people will go to the movie who will
Yeah.
never check the book out from the bookstore or from the library or buy it from the bookstore. So we're actually taking the gospel and making it more accessible than ever before in this new era of worship. The second thing I've been saying more recently is that we are sort of judging our online worship unfairly because we have all of our systems, our theology, our methodologies
Right.
built. I mean, centuries of work around in person worship, and we only have a year now under our belt. We haven't even really we haven't begun to think about the theology of our online worship and what it means and how do we do sacraments and relationships and all
Right.
of that. So I think we're comparing something that's really really mature to something that is very immature, and not
Yeah.
everything translates. So we have to start building our theology, our methodology, our best practices around our online worship.
No, I mean that's really good. I mean, we've done a few baptisms in the online worship space, which
Yeah.
is unique for sure. We've done communion a few times, but there is that rub, right? Like you have years, hundreds of years, thousands of years of theology
Yeah.
behind this is why we do communion this way or baptism this way.
Right.
But we know that it has to be done in this space.
Yeah.
But we come up with a rub of like what we've always known, what we know we need to do, and
Yeah.
how do we kind of reconcile that. But that's really good.
Well, let me share one final thought, and
Yeah.
it's one of my favorite things about this current era of worship that we are in. And I think if we lean into it, it's going to have a really incredible impact on the way that we do worship moving forward. And that is that I really believe we have moved from monologue to dialogue. Worship used to be one person standing up front, and she or he would share some thoughts, and we just receive them. And there wasn't really much back and forth. I mean, we might take prayer requests or whatever. I love that in real time we could take prayer requests. I love that we have this ability to ask a reflection question and leave time in the sermon to talk about it and engage with people in a one-on-one or one-on-many sort of way now. So I've seen some churches that have done a really, really excellent job of creating that kind of back and forth
Yeah.
dialogue. Uh,
Yeah, you might have just saw that I put a question on the screen, and so if you were going to answer that, don't answer that yet. We're going to get
oh,
to that here in a
no, I
second.
didn't see it. I mean, I
Perfect.
saw it for a second, but no worries.
Great, great. So, sorry, continue.
I was going to say, years ago, I've had an incredible opportunity over my career several times to work with Dr. Leonard Sweet. Usually we call him Len Sweet. And Len one time had me doing what he calls video VJing for him. And so basically I sat at the computer, and as he's preaching, I get to like pull up images and stuff like that. Well, he had one video that he shared ahead of time of these people that were basically just a big crowd. And one guy starts dancing in the crowd, and then somebody comes next to that person. They start dancing with them, and the next person, and then all of a sudden the entire crowd is dancing. But it took one person to kind of start this movement.
Yeah.
And so I think that when we think about participation in worship, we have this opportunity now when people are invited in, one person might say something, someone else, and all of a sudden it becomes this movement of people engaged in a new way. And the second thing I would say that just rings in my ears that Len, I've heard him say a number of times, is that he always said that, and I'm sure he still does say, the church of the future will be organized in circles, not in rows.
Mm-hmm.
I never imagined that the circles would be digital, but now through things like Zoom and texting and chat that's present in worship, we get to dialogue, we get to be in circles. And I think that's a pretty exciting thing for the church.
Yeah, well, Jason, you might not know this, but I'm a George Fox alum. So
okay.
Leonard Sweet is a man I know well. So
Very good.
almost did his D-Min at Portland Seminary is what they call it now. But he's
Yes.
he's a good dude.
He is.
Yeah. Well, hey, we'll head on now to our next question. So we've kind of talked like, what is it? Why is it important? And so before we do that, we're going to go into our next sauce.
Okay.
I made a silly decision, really. I've gone up way too fast. This is like one of my ones I ended with a
Okay.
few episodes ago. This was actually one of the ones that maybe made Adam cry.
Oh
Uh,
man.
so I packed a bag and I didn't really think about what I was packing. So this is a bad decision for me. But what do you have?
Well, I may be going down in intensity. I don't know, but I have the Chipotle Tabasco sauce, which I'm addicted to when I go to Chipotle, which is where I learned about this stuff and had to own it
Oh
for
yeah.
my had to own it for myself. So I don't know. It says smoked. I've never tried it on wings before, but we'll give it a shot here.
I'm not a big Tabasco fan, but the only Tabasco I like.
All right, we've I've doused it there. I don't know. We'll see.
So, oh, I can see it. So, as you
Okay.
take a bite real quick, would you share with us some of the biggest wins and losses, either of your own, or maybe you've seen, but you can kind of hide the names if you want, of hybrid worship in action?
Yes. All right, that was pretty tame. I maybe should have put that one first. I mean, it has a little kick to it, but it's not too bad. Um, so I brag all the time on a friend of mine, pastor that I got to know through the pandemic and have done some coaching with, a pastor named Kelly McCaig, who is at a church called Alamogordo, Grace Church, Alamogordo, New Mexico. And I've actually been sharing clips from Kelly in my webinar. He is so leaned into this. One of my favorite wins is that he came up with this idea of doing what I'm calling, I don't know if he's calling it this or not, but the digital passing of the peace. So
Yeah,
the
yeah.
idea is that he asked people in worship who are gathered in his space to take out their phones, to mute the audio, find our Facebook stream. It's gonna be a little delayed. That's okay, but I want you to go on there and say hello. And if you're worshiping from home today, I want you to say hello, and let's all just greet one another this morning, like we would if we were all here together. And I thought, what
Yeah.
a brilliant idea! It doesn't matter if you're at home or if you're in the room, um, and so on. I can show a clip if you are okay with the clip of what Kelly is doing that I'm bragging on. But if we don't have time for a clip, I won't show
Oh,
it.
please throw it
It's
up. Let's see it.
okay. So I got to get to it here.
Very few people come prepared with a clip, so I'm all about it.
Yeah, I feel like I'm doing press for a movie or something. I've been answering these same questions over and over. I should say, it's 9:30 here in my time zone, so I don't know. I've already done 3 webinars today, so I don't know how articulate I am this evening. But let me
You're
show
doing
you
great.
what he's doing. I love this. When I talk about the idea of moving from monologue to dialogue, here's how he really leaned into it in a series that he did. And the first part you'll see is a setup, and then I skipped a little bit, and then you'll see what he did with it.
We're going to switch things around today. I'm going to dive into the scripture passage soon and early so that we can have plenty of time at the end of the service to address your questions. Just a reminder, if you're just now tuning into us on our online campus throughout my sermon, if you have any questions about my sermon or any comments that you would like for me to address after the sermon, please put those into the Facebook feed or on YouTube. You can also text the number that will be on your screen if it's not already there. And for those of you in our congregation, you all have a pink slip of paper that has that exact same instructions. I really, really long to answer your questions, so please submit those as you're able to. Now the fun part, you ready? I've not even had a chance to look at these. They just got sent to me. We're going to rapid fire this. Question number 1. Thank you, first of all, for submitting your questions. We really appreciate it. Question number 1. Why did God create the serpent knowing what it would do? Very, very good question. We know very little about the origins of...
So I won't go into his whole answer, but it was so cool. I mean, he went through that whole thing, and every question that people submitted, well, I don't know if he answered every question, but everything he was doing at the end of his sermon there was really about a dialogue. And so
Yeah.
whether I was sitting in the room and I wrote it on a piece of paper or I texted it in from home, we all feel like we're a part of it because the pastor's actually speaking my question or the thing that I'm contributing.
Yeah.
So we're leaving room for the congregation to be a part of the worship that we do, not that it's all in the can. So that's a couple of my favorite things. Now, I've kind of recreated some of my favorite things that I've seen that have been kind of train wrecks in worship. And so I have this section that I do in the webinar, and these are all recreations of things I've seen.
I
So
love that.
everyone who's done them has been protected. But I call this great innovations in online worship. This first one I call the cheap seats. Some of us, again, just stuck the camera in the back of the room. You have to have a magnifying glass to actually see who's leading worship there. This next church took the opposite approach. I call this too close for comfort. You might want to back that camera off a little, or at least trim your eyebrow hairs just a touch. This next one I call surveillance camera worship. I like this one
Right.
because it's got night vision and nothing gets stolen off the altar anymore. I call this next one defying gravity. This church's tagline is "Come hang out with us," I think. Sometimes worship goes sideways and the camera is sideways, and so I've seen a lot of worship like this. But we'll take the gospel to people any way we can. I call this ring doorbell worship. Just step out on your front porch. And I like to stay up with the times, so I call this filtered worship. I'm not a cat. I'm not a cat. I'm not a cat. So those are some of my favorite examples.
I've seen more people in the last month and a half put a filter on an accident, which I don't even know how you do. But and I've watched a few people do it as a joke, which I appreciate, like let's make some humor out of it. But I've
Yes.
watched people not. There was I think a pastor or a priest of an
I saw that
archdiocese,
clip. Yes.
like Blues Brothers himself, right?
Yep. I just posted that on Facebook this week because a friend sent it to me. Yeah.
Maybe you were the person I saw it from.
That could be. Yeah. The thing is, what I keep telling people is that even though you have moments like that, I just keep reminding folks, Jesus is still Lord. Even when the technology doesn't work, even when something that doesn't go perfect. I have been telling people throughout this last year to remember that slick is not as important as authentic. So I really believe it's more important what you do in front of the camera than which camera you're using and how many cameras you have.
Right.
You can do really, really compelling worship with an iPhone or an Android or whatever.
Right.
In my webinar, I show a clip of Jimmy Fallon's show when he was at home. And his daughters are in the shot, and they've got graphics that are printed out, and his daughter's running music off an iPad, and his wife is
Right.
running the camera, and she's laughing. And I remind people that was nationally broadcast. And if that's okay for Jimmy, it's okay for you to not have a perfect worship service. So whether you're in a rural church in the middle of nowhere or in the city, or you're doing traditional or non-traditional or liturgical or not, what you do in front of the camera matters more than
Yeah.
the camera that you're using.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to think, like, with that episode. I remember when Jimmy Fallon came back on.
Yes.
He was in like a van, right? Like that episode was like part of it was recorded maybe in like it was an interesting episode, but it was some of the most compelling stuff he did because it was like you saw a new side of him you never got to see.
Yes, and I actually use 3 clips from the Tonight Show in the webinar. The first one I try to show what it was like before, and it was like high energy, fancy studio, 3-piece suit and tie, band, lots of energy. Then he was at home, and it felt like what it felt like for all of us being at home and doing it just
Right.
shoestring. And then when he actually came back to the studio, I show the end of the first week when he was back, and the studio looks more like a New York apartment. The band is
Yeah.
all spread out. He sits on a stool. He has clothing on a lot like what you're wearing today. Not the suit and tie and all of that.
Right.
So what I've been encouraging churches to think about is to think about what the next iteration of your worship looks like, not the previous. Jimmy didn't go back to pre-pandemic when he went back to the studio.
Correct.
If we do that, we run the risk, I think, of looking like we're out of touch or pretending like what we've been through didn't happen. And so I've told every church that I work with, iterate forward, don't revert backwards. Iterate forward. And so I've actually encouraged every church to start a both and think tank to think about what the next iteration of your worship looks like. And
That's
an
good.
iteration by its very nature is based on what's come before. It's not throwing everything out and starting over. It is what have we known before and what's the next version of it look like?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. My wife loved that. She's watching in the background. She just gave you some praise hands when you said that.
All right.
She was all
Very
about
good.
that. Well, hey, this is my favorite part, which is the Q&A, and I've been kind of checking. We've got 2 good questions thus far, but if you have questions, please drop them in the comments. We would love to have them, but why don't we sauce up real quick?
All right.
I'm going to do an old favorite, I'm going to do a little sriracha.
All right. Well, this sauce here, again, so creatively named, says hot. So I went from not so spicy to spicy, and now I'm upgrading. Oh, I guess I got to switch to my other camera here. I got it. And this is actually not unsealed, so this one's never even been tasted before in my household.
So it's real mystery.
It is. I don't know what this is going to do to me. By the
Well,
way,
I'm excited about it.
I typically have, just for you today, I changed my lights in the background to red rather than my typical blue because I wanted to fit the mood today. So, all right.
A little spicy, a little hot.
Here we go. I'm gonna really douse this thing here.
Ooh, I'm excited about this one.
I don't know. We're gonna see what happens. I actually brought a glass of milk along just in case I needed it. I guess that's supposed to be better than. All right, we'll switch.
I've been doing this for a while. Nothing helps.
Nothing helps? Okay.
Nothing helps.
All right, here we go. Get a little napkin under me here.
I'm nervous.
It's not as bad as I would expect. It's got a little bit of an after heat. I'm feeling it more now as I was than when I was chewing it. So
the afterburn. Well, hey, as the afterburn hits, here's the question I have for you. Metrics are hard to wrap our head around. A view can only be minutes long. So how do we know how many people are truly engaging? I know Facebook, will use an example, which we're on right now. They have 3-second views, 10-second views, and I think minute views, or what they use. Maybe 5-minute views after that. I can't remember how far they extend. But if you look at a video, you might see like, hey, that's your 3-second view. So how do you kind of parse through that? How do you know what your engagement is, which I think this person is trying to ask us here?
Yeah, I think that's the question everybody's trying to ask right now. I've been having that conversation a lot. In addition to these both-and webinars, I have about 5 annual conferences who have asked me to be in kind of an ongoing retainer coaching relationship with churches, and we're all trying to kind of figure it out. A couple things that I would suggest, and you might not like the answer, and that is that I don't know that we need to count views right now in the same way that we counted butts and seats, in the way that in the crude way that we once put it. Let me share with you something I saw a week or two ago that I thought was fascinating, and that I also think applies to the church, and we have to really start to rethink the way we measure impact. I saw an article, it might have been 2 weeks ago now, where every major network has now decided that they are no longer going to count the real-time Nielsen ratings, except CBS, which skews the oldest. They've got the oldest crowd. They are now going to measure the success of television shows based on DVR numbers and streaming numbers, and not pay attention to real time anymore. What those networks have realized is that we have changed our viewing habits. The way that we engage with content is different. And so I think that we are in the middle of a shift right now away from Sunday morning to what's happening in our homes. And you don't know if a view is 4 people sitting in a living room together, or 6 people, or 2 people, or 1 person. So you're taking a guess anyway. What I would instead encourage you to think about as far as measuring goes, there are other ways to measure what we're doing. One of those is just how many people. Now, first of all, I talked about the idea of moving from viewers to participants, or watchers to worshipers. People can't participate if we don't give them anything to participate in. So I think that we have to start thinking about what is a way for us to give people a next step. What are they going to do? And then measure how many people participate in those things, those Bible studies, that chat, that all those kind of things. That's one way. Another way that you might measure participation is with giving. People don't invest in something they're not really engaged in. And I've heard so many churches throughout this season tell me that their giving has either gone up or has been maintained throughout this pandemic. Now, it's not everyone's story, but that's another way to measure engagement. I had one pastor tell me, a while back when I was developing the webinar, I said, what are some of the great things that you've seen come out of this pandemic. I had one pastor tell me that in 5 years of pastoring the church that he's at, this past year, he's had more people ask to become members of the church than his entire 5 years there. And most of those people have been online. So we're seeing more people join the church, more people participate in worship. I had another church tell me that they had 22 first-time givers from the time the pandemic began till the end of the year last year. And most of those were people that were not regulars. So I think we have to start thinking about engagement in a different way that is not just the number on the screen or the butts in the seats, which is what we like. We often like to, it's the way that we used to think. In the same way that we used to all tune in to a television show and watch it on Monday night or Tuesday night together. We just have to think about the fact that our world, our paradigms are shifting and we're in the middle of it. And it's kind of hard to see the forest for the trees right now. So probably too long of an answer, but.
No, that's a great way to even end it. Like the forest through the trees, right? I mean, you see what's in front of you. You see maybe not even what's most important now, but what seems most important now, what's most readily in front of you. And I think it's right. We skew kind of what we're counting, what we're measuring, even how we're parsing through and processing it just based on what we know. And it's hard. I mean, there's no perfect answer.
Yes.
But we're going through it.
Well, and I would say probably the most important thing if you're gonna try and figure it out is to just be consistent. Keep counting it the same way. Don't
consistency is key.
Because if you change your strategy to this and then you do this, and you're going to be all over the map, and you're not really going to have any data to measure. So I think we're all still looking for the answer on that one.
Yeah, data is important. And so the other question, and I'll give you this one quickly, which is kind of techie question. Yeah, I've been told worshipers will tolerate less than perfect video, but what if the audio is messed up? Great example. You and we figured out my tech thing tonight, but you can actually hear a little bit of an echo if you're watching live on Facebook right now. And so but it looks like people are hanging out there watching, so apparently people will tolerate it. So that's anecdotal evidence. But what do you think? What do you think about that?
Can I show you the best video that will give you the answer to this question? It's a short video.
Yeah, I'm excited. Can I'm going to blow you up real quick. I'm going to make you big.
Yeah. I blew up in the promo for this today too. Give me 1 second to grab it. Let's see. All right. So check this out. I think this demonstrates it really well for us.
Let's play a little bit of a game here. Imagine you're shooting a film or video and you have a choice to make between really good video quality and really good audio quality. Which do you choose? You'd be surprised how many people actually choose really good video and how this could probably be to their detriment. And we're going to show you two examples. First, really good audio but really terrible video. So you can see with really terrible video how you can follow what I'm saying, how you can get into the story despite the fact that the image has been degraded. Directors will use this creatively, like the Blair Witch Project, which is like an hour and a half of really terrible video, but the audio is so good, you can follow the story. Things change drastically when we switch that around.
Suddenly, with really bad audio, it's hard to take what I'm doing seriously. It's hard to take this whole video seriously. And to get through something like this that's even 5 minutes is painful. This might work maybe with action cams if the content is really good, like a skydiver. We kind of forgive that for a second. But for actual film content, you can't pull this off. It's terrible and it's unwatchable. And it's only unwatchable because the audio is terrible. So I'm going to switch things back for the benefit of all of us.
You can see how having good video and good audio is so super important. But if you had to choose, you shouldn't have to choose, but if you had to, maybe good audio is what you should be choosing.
So I don't know if that exactly answers the question, but I think it illustrates it pretty well. There are things that you can do to improve your audio pretty significantly. So like I'm going to just show it. Well, no, I can't. I probably can't do it because we're running through Google here. But normally I will actually show you. Let me see if this makes any difference. I don't know that it will. Can you hear any difference in my audio right now? Yes?
No.
No? No? Okay. Yeah, I think I'd have to switch it. Hold on. Maybe there's a way I can do it here. Yes. Hold on one sec. You will hear a significant difference. Now you are hearing the microphone on my computer. Can you hear the difference there?
Yeah.
Yep. And so let me switch back here. Now you are hearing this condenser mic in front of me, and what a difference it is just to be off the computer versus on a mic that's in front of me. They have devices like this. This here is called a Rode iXLR, and basically it plugs. This will plug right into, if you have an iPhone. This will plug right into an iPhone, and then this is an XLR mic, so you can put a regular mic in there, and that dramatically changes the quality of the sound. A couple other things that make a difference. If you don't have the ability to acquire one of these, the closer you get to the camera, the better it's going to sound. And then also being able to put some sound dampening around your the area that you're in. Like when I switch to the other mic, I'm in a big room, so it's going to echo. But I could put, and it's weird in the room, but you could put blankets up around the space between the person and the camera, and that's actually going to make it sound better than to have all that open room and open space. If you have what you're wearing right now, if you have AirPods or Buds, it looks a little different on camera, but it's going to sound a lot better because that mic is picking up the audio from right here versus being 3 feet from me and picking up all the room too. So And nowadays the phones, the quality of the video on our phones is so high that the audio is what to tackle.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think that's an interesting thing for people to consider is like, if there's a lot of issues, what is the issue to tackle? And that's a great one to know. Tackle that one first. And so we got 2 more questions though. We're going to get hot, and I have a special set of sauces for my final question.
Okay.
But we got one more before we get there. Which is this. Well, actually, I'll take it off real quick. So I got what is called the Dingo Widowmaker. I think it's going to be hot.
All right, this one is called extra hot.
Ooh.
I don't know what that means, but the last one was hot. This is extra hot. So
the question ahead of you is, and maybe some of these again we maybe answered, but what roadblocks have made or make hybrid worship difficult to embrace? And maybe as you kind of get ready to take a bite, do your thing. Like sometimes it's like finances make it hard to embrace. Sometimes it's our tradition. Sometimes it's our theology. Sometimes it's our liturgy. There's a myriad of things. But from your experience, you've done a lot of these webinars, had a lot of conversations. What have you seen has made it hard for people to embrace this?
Yeah, that's got some kick to it. Hold on a second. By the way, shout out to my friends at The Journey in Harrisburg for giving me this mug.
Chris Sledge.
My buddy Chris Sledge, Deb Port, all the awesome people there. So I would say one of the biggest roadblocks isn't financial or technological or any of those things. It is getting outside of the box that we've been living in for so long. Part of it is that we limit our thinking on what's possible. I truly believe that what you do in front of the camera and the authenticity that you do it with is more important, again, than the technology. So you can when I do the webinar, I actually show examples that were just shot on an iPhone. They're really great examples. I show multiple camera setups, and sometimes the stuff that's simpler is better because the content is better, not because the technology is better. Right. So some of it is just rewiring our brains and trying to see things in a new way. You do have naysayers, but I got to tell you, my experience over the last year has been that church leaders are telling me their people are more malleable than they've ever been. Because there's almost like this sense that we lost worship. We had to stop. And so, Pastor, I don't care what you do as long as we can have worship. If you need to buy a camera, buy a camera. They've made the money available. I've had pastors tell me over the last year, I tried to get online and nobody would let me do it. and this pandemic hit, and it was like the money was allocated in a week. Go
Right.
do it. So I've been encouraging pastors not to waste this season, that people are open to change and trying new things. So part of it is that we just have to get out of our own way a little bit and not be rooted so much in what we've done before, but think about the fact that we're telling the old story in a new time, in a new way, for a new audience. One of the ways I think we combat that well is to build a team around ourselves that are not people exactly like us. Like, what would it look like to have a new believer on your team as you're developing worship, to make sure that your language isn't confusing to the outsider? What would it be like to have a young person, high school person, or school age person, along with a retirement age person, and to have kind of a team that vets these experiences that we're creating? Because when you have a young person, an old person, a male, a female, racial diversity, all of those things on a team together, you tend to create worship, if everybody can agree that this connects, that resonates. That's the other thing. I'm a big fan of describing worship not as contemporary or traditional, but resonant. How do we create worship that resonates with people?
Yeah.
Because there are things about tradition that resonate. There are things about non-tradition that resonates. And so what if we started to think more in terms of what are the things that resonate and so on? I don't know if that's a cop-out answer.
No, it's good.
But I think the biggest part is we're limited by our own imagination. Like, we can't picture worship different than what it was before.
Yeah.
Let me share one. Can I share one quote with you that
Oh,
I've been
please,
sharing
yeah.
it in my webinar? And this is not my thought, but I agree with it wholeheartedly. Carey Nieuwhof has this to say about online worship. He says, right now, pastors are using online to bring people into the building, but he believes in the future, pastors will use the building to get people online. And I really believe that's true because, again, we have that opportunity for dialogue and interactivity. We have the ability for people to consume worship, which is a weird term, but to consume worship on their terms. So when they're ready for it, and time and distance don't matter anymore. Used to be that it happened at a certain time, certain space, and now people can worship whenever, wherever, from their homes, from their devices, and so on.
Yeah, well, that's a great quote. And actually, and both his quote and what you said, a great segue kind of into our final question. And so, final sauce, mine actually, and so this is the whole reason I got Buffalo Wild Wings. They have a new blazing sauce, which is their hottest, but it's a Carolina Reaper flavor. And so that's supposed to be hot. So I'm going to give it a try.
That sounds scary. Now, I'm sure that anybody who's really into hot sauce is just laughing at me because I don't know what any of these things are. This is Frank's Red Hot sauce that says cayenne pepper sauce, the perfect blend of flavor and heat. So I don't know.
You should have put that at the beginning.
Should I? Is this like really weak?
It'll be great. It's pretty tasty.
Okay. I don't know. I'm
well,
not
I do know they make different levels of Frank's.
Okay. I don't really, I don't think I've ever tasted this. I don't even know why it's in our house. All right. I've given it some, a douse there.
So as you take a bite, what is the best first step someone can take towards creating compelling hybrid worship?
Let me take another bite here.
I'll take one with you.
It burns the lips a little. It's got a little kick to it. It's not terrible. I feel like I wimped out. If I had known what to get, I would have got something hotter.
Hey, you're all right. Not everyone's a spice master.
So first steps. I would say number one, recognize that the experiences are different. The in-person and the online are different. One of the ways I've been describing this in my webinar is to think about the difference between when you go to a professional sporting event, going to the game and watching the game at home are completely different things, even though the game is the same. So the experience that you have when you're sitting with those fans, you're doing the wave. You smell the hot dogs and the beer, the root beer because we're Methodist, right? And there's just so much about being there that's different. Now, keep in mind that at home, you have multiple camera angles. You have the graphics projected on the field. You have commentators that help you know what's going on. Also, there are things that don't translate. So when you're at the game, if a player gets injured, you just have to watch the people come out and tend to that player and put them on the golf cart and drive them off, and that could take 10 minutes. At home, they're going to show you highlights of other games. They're going to show a prepackaged video. They recognize that not everything translates. So I think first step is really understanding that not everything is a one-to-one. Not everything that happens in the room makes sense for the audience gathered at home or the congregation gathered at home. And so as we start to embrace that idea, what does it look like to do worship in the room for people that makes sense? And what is it like? Keep it like communion, for instance. In the room, you go up and you take these little hermetically sealed communion elements, and you've got your mask on, you're 6 feet apart. That may take 5 minutes in worship as you have people gathered in the space. But 5 minutes at home and me sitting on my couch like this, I'm just waiting for it to be over. And in fact, I'm likely to go up and get a cup of coffee or let my dog out, or somebody pops up on Facebook and starts chatting with me. So one of the things I have introduced in this webinar is what I call alternate moments, where maybe you might talk to people in their home, somebody off camera or a pre-recorded video piece or whatever. One example of that is I know a church that collects backpacks for foster kids. So in worship, those backpacks come up. And it's way inspiring in worship to see those backpacks come forward. But at home, a lot of what I'm seeing is like people walk in front of the camera and backsides and behinds. And, 5 minutes of that, I'm going to tune out. I'm not going to pay attention. But an alternate moment might be that I pre-recorded a video where I say, friends, this week is our backpack weekend. And this is the backpack that we're giving out. And here's what we put in it. And those backpacks, we partner with, Friends of Joy, a ministry here in our town that deals with foster children. And so I'm talking to people at home, and the room never sees this. It's either pre-recorded or I'm a host in the other room, and I'm keeping the people at home engaged the same way that the commentators would talk to you if a player's injured. So we start thinking about worship in two different ways. How do we capture the people here and the people at home? And I'll say just one more thing here, and that is that I think there are 4 audiences we have to consider as we do worship in the next season of ministry. Audience number 1 is the people in the room with you. Audience number 2 that we have to think about are those who are connected to your church, but maybe not quite ready to come back yet. They're watching from home. You know those people. So for instance, I'll share the example after. The third audience that I think we have to consider, and we have to give this more consideration than we have been, is that you have visitors and guests who are now watching your worship for the first time, who don't know anything at all about you, and they're making a decision on whether they want to come back or not. The fourth audience that I think we all need to consider is that a lot of people are now watching on delay, not real time. And sometimes that means they're watching 6 months later, a year later, and you think, how's that possible? Well, I might search, let's say I'm a person that's struggling with fear right now, but I'm a person of faith. And I go to YouTube and I search faith and fear, and Danny's got a message that comes up that says, finding your faith in the midst of fear. I've never met you. I don't know a thing about you, but I'm someone that's struggling with fear. Right. So I may consume this content 6 months later. And so what I've been telling people is we have to really give our sermons a pass that is what I call the evergreen content pass. You have to look at your sermon and say, is this still going to make sense in 6 months? And when it doesn't make sense is when you say, you might remember in week 1 and 2, we talked about all this stuff. And so that's really the answer. We talked about it in 1 and 2. Well, I wasn't here for 1 and 2. I don't even know what 1 and 2 is.
I don't care about 1 and 2.
Exactly. So let's think about kind of evergreen. So those 4 audiences, I'll give you one example and then I'll stop talking. Think about the fact that Palm Sunday is coming up. Our tradition often in the church is to use palm branches. And so here's a way, again, we want participants, not viewers. So in the room, you hand out palm branches to everyone. They can be a part of it and participate. The kids can walk around with those palm branches. That's great. We have the second audience are the people that we already know. They're part of our church, right? We could send those palm branches out or organize a team to go and deliver those, put them on your front porch. We've delivered your Palm Sunday kit. It's right there for you. You've got that third audience, those people who are not connected to us, who maybe just happened upon your worship and were like, this is great, but how do I participate in this? Well, you might consider a downloadable option. So you have a PDF file that you post in your chat and in your video that is a palm branch that you encourage people at the beginning. Get your scissors and tape out. We're going to do a little craft project today during worship, and we're going to tell you what to do at the end. And then the last thing is those people who watch later. And if you've got a downloadable version of what you want them to participate in, then it's evergreen content, and I can cut that thing out myself. And now I'm not probably going to do that for Palm Sunday, but there might be other opportunities to engage. So we've just got to expand our thinking. We can't, again, just go about worship as we always have and put a camera in the back of the room and say, okay, we're doing hybrid worship. We really have to think about how are we going to reach those folks at home too and make them feel like they're a part of it.
Right. Yeah. It's funny to think about. I just preached my Palm Sunday message for online just a few days ago. But one thing I said in it was the whole palm idea is really weird to someone who's not churched.
Yes.
And so that's an interesting audience. How do you make that whole moment in movement, which is really unaccessible maybe in person, but we have not cared about it because I don't think usually care about that kind of stuff. Like that's not things churches do really well anyway. Right. But now how do we do that online? Like how do we make that moment that is unaccessible accessible?
Yes.
But do that all across the calendar year of the church. It's important.
Yeah. In my other webinar, I talked about three audiences to consider for online worship. I talked about the committed. Those are the people that are already with you, and they're the ones that you most naturally think about. The disconnected. So there are people who have left your church or left the church in general, but they have church memory. And you think about the way you might write a sermon or talk about a palm branch to them to reconnect. And then the third audience that we don't give enough thought to are those who are seeking God right now in a time where our world is a mess. You know, we got a pandemic and jobs and just political stuff and all the stuff that's going on around us. You have to watch your language when you think about those folks. One story that I often tell, it's one of my favorite stories to tell, if I've got time or if I don't.
Please do.
A pastor friend of mine in Las Vegas said one time, I was secret worshiping at a church, and he said, you all know about the power of the Holy Eucharist, right? And I watched this woman in front of me turn to her daughter, and she said, nope. And I laughed at that, but the daughter turned back to her and said, you don't know about the Holy Uterus? And she said, uterus, like the female anatomy. And I told the pastor after worship, I said, I got an anatomy lesson in worship today. And he said, what'd you hear? And I told him, and he said, oh, I guess I should have said Holy Communion. And I said, yeah, you think? The thing is we can't assume all the same things. We say words like, in some of our churches, doxology or sacrament or Eucharist. And those words, they're not bad words. We just have to build bridges into them. So like you said, a palm branch doesn't make a lick of sense to the outsider unless you explain what it means. We can't assume the same things now that we're taking church to people.
Yeah. Why is this Palm Sunday? It doesn't make any sense. So, hey, so you survived the gauntlet of wings. You've done great. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to blow your screen up, and I'm going to let you just do something that I would love for you. Can you pitch your webinar? Anyone that's interested in joining it, do you want to pitch it a little bit? Give people maybe the sales pitch of why they might want to get the whole thing, not just a Hot Thoughts episode of it?
Well, I mean, I probably have kind of done that all throughout, but sure. I think I feel like I'm going to repeat myself a lot here, but I just think we are in uncharted territories. I just so happen to be in God's timing at one of the leading churches in the early days of what we called the Media Reformation. I was at Ginghamsburg Church around the time that church became a mega church. Again, it was already on the going up before I got there, but I was there right around the time that things really kind of exploded, and we had national attention and all those kind of things. And in that season, back in the early mid 90s, late 90s, we were just learning the power of using technology in worship, using graphics and video and all of that. I feel like this is as important, if not more important, the season of ministry that we're in right now than that was for those of us who did install screens and all of those things. And I really believe that if we are intentional about our strategies and we start to build relationships with people online and in person, we're going to have more impact than we've ever had in the church. We have made church accessible in this last year in a way that it hasn't been to folks. And there's a lot to mourn. When you talk about consolidating worship for online, when you talk about adapting some of our practices and so on, you may consolidate someone's favorite piece. You may adapt the thing that somebody loves the most. The Both And webinar that I offer really gives about 5 big ideas on how to meet the time we're in with strategies that are really about how to make it so no one feels like an afterthought. I'll just say that anyone that was doing worship online shifted their strategy when this pandemic hit. Because before it was, good morning, welcome to worship. We're so glad you're here. Oh, and if you're worshiping with us online, thanks for coming today. And then we go back for an hour and talk to people in person.
Right.
And we didn't have another model back then. So I liked being able to worship from home or vacation or whatever. But everything changed when we stopped doing this and we started doing this and talking to people at home. A crude metaphor that I sometimes use is that my dog likes to sometimes sit next to me when I'm working on the couch on my laptop. And if I reach over and scratch him behind the ears, I have made a fatal flaw because the moment I take my hand off of his head, he starts nudging up against me like, hey, pay attention to me. Before that, he was fine, right? I think we have woken people up at home to what it feels like to be talked to and engaged. And if we take that away from them, I think we'll lose what we've gained in this last year, and we've gained so much. So that's what it's all about. If you're in about 43 annual conferences, your conference has either hosted this, or if you're a United Methodist, your conference has either already hosted this or is about to host it. And every conference that I do, I allow them 3 months to have the recording. So if your conference is already hosted, you have access to this right now. And if your conference is going to host, I've got another 20 or 30 of them between now and May. You'll have the opportunity to participate in that full thing. And if your conference isn't on the list, which there's about 5 or 6 conferences left, talk to your leaders. Tell them you'd like this training, and I would love to do it for you.
Let's get this guy on the list. Let's go. Are there? I don't even know. Are there 50 annual conferences? I should know.
I think there's like I don't think I've done a great count, but I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of like 40 or 54 or 53 or something. I'm at 44 right now. So.
Well, let's get you to 54. And I appreciate you doing this. This was a lot of fun. I learned a lot just hearing from you, and it's been fun watching you from afar over these past couple of months, kind of doing this webinar and getting to see clips here and there. And it was cool watching you kind of in the ideation stage of getting ready to launch it. And so I'm just blessed to get a chance to have this conversation, share some hot wings with you in the process. And I look forward to seeing all of our churches kind of learn from what we have in the season ahead of us.
Yes. Well, thank you, Danny. It's an honor to be on the show. I tried some things tonight that I hadn't tried before, and that's what this whole season is about, right? We all got to try things we've never tried. And friends, sometimes it's going to be a little spicier than you expected. Sometimes things are not. But remember, when the technology fails, when it doesn't go perfect, Jesus is still Lord, and that matters most. So thanks, Danny, for the opportunity to share some hot thoughts today.
Yeah, I'm appreciative of you and of the analogy you just made. I didn't know my show had such a great analogy to your webinar, and it worked out well. But friends, we'll see you back here again. We just got a few more episodes left in season 3. Jason, thank you so much for being here, and we'll be back again